You've got to be kidding me, I muttered, staring at the photo on Adam's phone. The teenage girl's sullen expression and dark makeup were unmistakable. It was Jenna, one of my most challenging tutoring students this year. Adam sighed deeply. That's my daughter Amelia. She'll be coming to live with us next week. My heart pounded as realization set in. Amelia was the daughter he had briefly mentioned from a youthful fling before we met. But to have her show up now, after 16 years? This troubled girl was going to be under our roof? Why the sudden change? I asked carefully, my mind spinning. Adam rarely spoke of his past indiscretions. He shrugged. Her mother's being deployed overseas for work. Amelia didn't want to move, so she'll stay with us. I studied his impassive expression, suspecting he wasn't being fully truthful. Still, this was a bombshell, a secret daughter upending our peaceful life together. Over the next few days, I watched Adam transform our guest room into a teenage girl's bedroom, painting the walls purple and setting up a desk for studying. I wondered if he was trying to atone for his past negligence as a father. When Amelia, or Jenna as I knew her, arrived, it was even more bizarre seeing her defiant sneer in our hallway. In my tutoring sessions, she had been constantly disruptive, with a concerning lack of effort. "Hey," she muttered flatly as Adam introduced us. I could already sense the challenges ahead with such a problematic houseguest. That first night, I overheard Amelia on a call in her room. "This place is a prison, Mom. I don't know how long I can keep up this stupid act." My stomach dropped. I had suspected Jenna came from a troubled home, but could she and her mother be putting on an elaborate con? Using Adam's own guilt against him for their gain? I knew I would have to tread very carefully. Over the next few weeks, Amelia's presence became increasingly disruptive. Her rude comments and blatant disregard for our household rules quickly frayed my nerves. Adam, however, seemed oblivious, or perhaps unwilling to address her behavior. "She's just a teenager finding her way," he'd say with a dismissive wave whenever I brought up her latest transgression. "Give her some space." Space? The girl was slowly taking over our home like an ill-mannered squatter. Her rooms were constantly trashed, she'd leave messes everywhere, and I'd catch her sneaking out at night multiple times. "Amelia, we need to talk about your actions," I stated firmly one morning after discovering she had stolen my good bottle of bourbon. "This cannot continue." She rolled her eyes defiantly. "Yeah, whatever. You're not my real mom." "Maybe not, but I deserve basic respect in this house," I shot back, my temper flaring. "Your father works hard to give you a home here." "Oh, Daddy works so hard, does he?" she sneered. "For whose benefit, I wonder?" The insinuation hung heavy in the air. I opened my mouth to retort, but Adam stepped between us. "That's enough, both of you. Amelia, go to your room." As she stormed off, I turned to Adam incredulously. "You're actually taking her side? After that attitude?" He avoided my gaze. "She's just a kid, Claire. Lashing out is normal for her age. So her blatant disrespect is okay? You're making excuses." We argued heatedly until I finally gave up, retreating to the bedroom in fuming silence. This was not the life I had envisioned when I married Adam. A few days later, I made a discovery that turned my world upside down. While using Adam's computer for work, I noticed his email was still logged in. Telling myself I shouldn't snoop, I started to close it, but a particular name in his inbox caught my eye. Jessica. My heart raced as I opened the email thread. The conversations dated back months before Amelia's arrival. Jessica was apparently her mother, and the emails detailed their plan for Amelia to move in and make herself at home with us. It was all a scheme, a ploy to insert their way into our lives, and judging by the frequent mentions of getting what's owed, likely for financial gain. I felt sick realizing Adam had been lying to me this entire time. Worse, Amelia, Jenna, was fully complicit. This was my own troubled student, now living under my roof to help fleece her own father. The deception made my head spin. I spent the next few days quietly observing Amelia's behaviors through new eyes. The sneaking out, the rudeness, it was all an act to aggravate Adam and destabilize our household. A long con that my husband had agreed to, for reasons I didn't yet understand. As much as it pained me, I knew I needed to play along for now and gather more evidence. To take them down, I needed to be 2 steps ahead in their own twisted game. Amelia's presence became increasingly unbearable after my discovery of the emails. Knowing she was actively conning us, her every action took on new insidious meaning. The smirks, the sass, the blatant disregard for our house rules, it was all choreographed to undermine Adam and destabilize our home life. "You left your crap all over the living room again," I stated coldly one evening as she sauntered in from another late night out. She shrugged, popping a piece of gum loudly. So, this is our home, not a flophouse. Show some respect." "Respect?" She laughed mockingly. "That's rich, coming from you." I bristled, fighting to keep my anger in check. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Like you even know the first thing about me or my life." "Maybe if you acted like a normal human being instead of a rude, entitled brat." "Hey!" Adam's voice cut me off as he entered. "What's going on here?" "Just dealing with your daughter's wonderful attitude as usual," I snapped. Amelia smirked. "Daddy's little princess has a problem following rules, I guess." "Don't start," I warned, but Adam raised his hands placatingly. Okay. Let's all just take a deep breath, all right?" I shook my head in disgust, storming off to the kitchen, as if his calm negotiations would stop this act they were putting on. The worst part? I couldn't even confide in Adam about my discoveries. He was clearly complicit in this scheme with Amelia's mother Jessica, revealing what I knew could spook them into accelerating their con. No, I needed to bide my time and continue gathering evidence to expose their plot. Starting with finding out exactly what getting what's owed meant in those emails. Over the next few weeks, I scoured Adam's computer and files whenever he was away at work, searching for any paperwork or communications that could shed light on Jessica's motivation. What I found made my blood boil. Years ago, when Adam was briefly involved with Jessica, he had gotten her pregnant with Amelia. Instead of taking responsibility, he paid Jessica a lump sum of money to walk away and terminate the pregnancy. Except she hadn't. And now, years later, they were back to extract even more from him through this deception. I felt physically ill realizing the depths of Adam's past betrayal and how Amelia was being used as a pawn for her mother's revenge. This was no longer just a con. It was a vicious, calculated scheme to make my own husband miserable. When Adam returned home that evening, I could barely look at him. He must have sensed my anger because he pulled me aside with forced cheerfulness. "Hey, what's going on? You've seemed really tense lately." I met his gaze levelly. "Have I? Gee, I wonder why that could be, with your lying, conniving daughter making our lives hell." His expression faltered. "Claire, I know she's been difficult, but she's my child. Your child that you once wanted terminated," I hissed, no longer caring about playing dumb. "That's what this is really about, isn't it? Jessica's revenge for you trying to make Amelia disappear." Adam's face drained of color. For a long moment he could only sputter uselessly. I shook my head in disgust. "I can't even look at you right now." Turning, I headed upstairs, my mind racing with the next steps. With Adam's secret out in the open, there was no more holding back. It was time to dismantle this sick little family con once and for all, by whatever means necessary. With Adam's past deception now exposed, the tension in our household was thick enough to cut with a knife. Amelia continued her calculated misbehavior, no doubt trying to further destabilize our home on her mother's behalf. I, however, was done playing their game. If Adam was too cowardly or complicit to put a stop to this, I would take matters into my own hands. "We need to talk," I stated firmly, cornering Amelia in the kitchen one morning before she could slink back to her room. She rolled her eyes. "About what?" "About you and your mother's little scheme to extort money from my husband." Her bravado faltered for just a moment before the sneer returned. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't play dumb. I know all about the emails between your mom and Adam, plotting for you to move in and make yourself at home here." I stepped closer, keeping my voice low and menacing. "Using his own daughter as a pawn to get what's owed? That's low, even for him." Panic flickered across her face before the mask of indifference returned. "You're crazy, lady. I'm just living here, that's all. After he paid your mother to have you terminated as a pregnancy?" That struck a nerve. Amelia's fists clenched, her eyes burning with hatred I hadn't seen before. "That's a lie. My mom wouldn't." "Wake up," I snapped, feeling perverse satisfaction at her shock. "Your mom's just using you as a tool for payback over Adam's past choices. This is all one big con." Amelia opened her mouth to respond, but a new voice cut through the tension. That's enough. Adam stood in the doorway, fury etched across his features as he pulled Amelia protectively behind him. You've gone too far, Claire. Making up lies to turn my own daughter against me? I laughed derisively. That's rich, coming from you. I have the emails, Adam. All the proof of your pathetic deal with Jessica to make Amelia disappear years ago. That's what this has all been about, her revenge, using your own flesh and blood. For once, Adam seemed at a loss for excuses or placating words. Amelia stared between us, her expression unreadable. Well, I pressed, aren't you going to admit to your lies, your betrayal of me, of your own family? Adam's jaw tightened, and I wondered if he might finally come clean. If this would be the moment where, "Get out!" The quiet venom in his voice stopped me cold. What? You heard me, he stated, wrapping an arm around Amelia. After the cruel, vindictive lies you've spewed, I want you out of this house, tonight. My heart dropped to my stomach as the words hit like a physical blow. Adam, you can't be serious. This is my home, too. Not anymore, he said with chilling finality. Not after you've made it so toxic with your deranged accusations against my daughter. I opened my mouth, but no words came out. He was choosing them, the ones deceiving and manipulating him, over his own wife. Tears stung my eyes as I looked between their impassive faces. In that moment, I felt more alone than I ever had before. Swallowing hard, I met Adam's gaze with as much dignity as I could muster. You'll see the truth soon enough, and when you do... I shook my head slowly. Well, don't come crawling back to me. Turning, I headed upstairs to pack what few belongings I could quickly gather. My home, my life, was crumbling around me, but I wouldn't go down without a fight. If Adam was too blinded by familial bonds to see the truth, I would make him open his eyes. Whatever it took, I would expose this twisted scheme and make them pay. The real battle was only just beginning. After Adam kicked me out, I spent a few aimless weeks crashing with friends, my mind spinning over how to expose Jessica and Amelia's twisted scheme. I couldn't simply walk away, not with that vile mother using her own daughter as a pawn against my husband. Eventually, I settled into a small rental apartment, using what little savings I had to get by. More importantly, it gave me a base to operate my counterattack and gather indisputable proof of their con. My first move was to make copies of the damning emails between Adam and Jessica that I had discovered. I also began meticulously documenting every instance of Amelia's calculated misbehavior at home to build a case against her. Next, I hired a private investigator to start digging into Jessica's background. Within weeks, they uncovered a trail of shady activities, unpaid loans, evictions, and a string of wealthy ex-boyfriends she had burned. This was clearly a long pattern of deception on her part. Armed with this new evidence, I requested a sit-down with Adam at a neutral location, a coffee shop near his office. He arrived looking haggard and defensive. What is this about, Claire? I have nothing left to say to you after your unforgivable behavior. I slid the thick manila envelope across the table. This is about the truth, the whole truth about your lies, and the con your ex and daughter have been pulling on you. Adam hesitated before flipping open the envelope, his brow furrowing as he thumbed through the documents inside. The email transcripts, the PI's report on Jessica, my logs of Amelia's troublemaking. As the weight of the evidence became undeniable, I could see the conflict playing across his face. Part of him still wanted to cling to deluded denial, but the proof was far too compelling. You went this far? He finally said, seemingly unsure whether to be awed or outraged. I leaned forward intently. I had to, Adam. After the way you turned on me and kicked me out over their lies, you left me no choice but to take this into my own hands. Shame flickered across his features, but he remained defensive. Even if some of this is true, Amelia is still my blood. You don't understand how important that is. I shook my head sadly. You're right, I don't, because you never gave me the chance to understand by being honest with me from the start. My voice had risen, drawing glances from nearby tables. I took a breath to rein in my anger. Look at the evidence, Adam. Look at what kind of person Jessica really is, using your own child to try to fleece you. Where does her manipulation end? How much further will she go? He didn't respond, his jaw tensing as he avoided my stare. For a long moment, an uncomfortable silence stretched between us. Finally, he spoke in a hoarse murmur. "You're right. I should have been upfront with you about Amelia from the beginning. I didn't want to risk losing you over my past mistakes." "Well, you did lose me," I stated flatly. "The question now is, are you going to continue letting them use and manipulate you? Or are you finally going to stand up and be a man?" Adam's shoulders slumped, all the fight seeming to go out of him. He looked utterly defeated in that moment, a broken man slowly coming to grips with the reality he had avoided for too long. "I don't know," he muttered, staring down at the envelope's damning contents. "I just don't know anymore." Pushing back from the table, I stood to leave. He didn't try to stop me. "Think it over," I said quietly. "And remember, the truth won't go away, no matter how hard you try to ignore it." As I walked away, I felt a surprising sense of calm determination. For too long I had been on the defensive against Adam and his deceptive family, but now the battlefield was level. The weapons of truth and justice were finally on my side. It was time to go on the attack. Several tense weeks went by without a word from Adam after our confrontation. I tried not to get my hopes up that he was finally seeing the light about Jessica and Amelia's twisted scheme. He had been too deep in denial for too long. Then one evening my phone rang, Adam asking if we could meet again to talk. I agreed, bracing myself for whatever excuses or rationalization he might throw my way next. When we met at a quiet bar, however, Adam looked utterly despondent. Broken, even. "You were right," he stated flatly after we sat down. "About all of it. Jessica, Amelia, the lies, the manipulation. It was all one big con." Despite the vindication, I felt no joy or satisfaction as I studied his haggard expression. "How did you finally realize?" I asked quietly. Adam dragged a hand down his face, suddenly looking decades older. "After you showed me all that evidence, I couldn't keep deluding myself anymore. I started digging deeper into Jessica's past like you did, and—" He shook his head slowly. "Let's just say she has a pattern of using men to bankroll her lifestyle, then discarding them once she's bled them dry." "So you were just the next target for her and Amelia to sink their claws into," I murmured. "Exactly. And I was the perfect mark, a successful businessman with assets, blinded by my own guilt and desire to play father to the daughter I abandoned." A rueful, self-loathing laugh escaped his lips. "She played me like a damn fiddle from the start." "And Amelia?" I pressed. "What did she have to say when you confronted her about the truth?" A flicker of anguish passed over Adam's features. "At first she denied it, calling me crazy and paranoid like they had you. But once I showed her ironclad proof of her mother's patterns, she just went cold and silent." He slowly shook his head. "My own daughter? Conspiring with her mother to take me for everything I have. All these years, she never gave a damn about having me in her life. I was just a mean to an end for their sick game." Despite everything, I felt a pang of sadness seeing the dejected man before me, forced to confront such an ugly truth about his own flesh and blood. "I'm so sorry, Adam," I said quietly. "As much as they hurt and betrayed me too, I can't imagine the pain of having your own child turned so monstrous." A hollow laugh escaped his lips. "Well, we reap what we sow, don't we? This is the price for the lies and cowardice in my past, running away from problems instead of facing them." I didn't disagree. Adam's refusal to take responsibility for his past mistakes had opened the door for Jessica to slither back into our lives with her poisonous agenda. "So what now?" I asked carefully. "What are you going to do about them?" Adam's jaw tightened, a flash of the strong man I'd married briefly returning to his eyes. "The only thing I can do. Cut them off for good, once and for all. No more money, no more enabling their sick need for revenge." He looked up at me intently. "And No, I need your help, Claire. You're the only one who had my back through this nightmare, even when I was too blind to see it." I considered for a moment, part of me still stung by the cruel way he had turned on me in siding with Jessica and Amelia before. But seeing this broken man, reaching for a last shred of redemption, I knew I couldn't turn away. Slowly, I reached across the table and grasped his hand, squeezing it firmly. "You've got it. We'll take them down together, for good this time. No more lies, no more running. It's time they finally face the consequences." Adam's eyes glistened with a mixture of shame, relief, and renewed determination. He simply nodded. The reckoning was coming. and this time nothing would stop justice from being served. With Adam finally seeing the truth about Jessica and Amelia's twisted con, we wasted no time springing into action. First order of business, cutting off their access to his money and assets before they could bleed him dry. We met with Adam's lawyers and accountants, laying out the evidence I had gathered so they could erect a legal fortress protecting his finances. Bank accounts were frozen, investment portfolios locked, even his personal credit cards canceled. If those two vipers thought they were going to continue living off my husband's dime, they had another thing coming. Next, we moved to separate Amelia from her enabler mother's influence. Adam contacted Jessica, demanding she come to the house to collect her daughter's belongings immediately. When she arrived with Amelia in tow, I could practically see the dollar signs in their eyes. "What's going on, Adam?" Jessica simpered, all fake concern. "Why are you kicking my baby out?" "Can it?" I snapped before Adam could respond. "We know all about your little scheme to fleece him using Amelia. The con is over." Jessica's sugary facade quickly melted into a sneer. "You've got no proof of anything, just more of your deranged ramblings, Claire." Smirking, I tossed a thick manila envelope at her feet, the contents spilling out, copies of emails, financial records, the PI's report laying out her patterns of deceit. "Oh, I've got proof all right. Reams of it." Her eyes widened as she scrambled to scoop up the papers, realization dawning. She turned to Amelia desperately. "Baby, this crazy bye. Don't talk to her." Adam's voice boomed. "Surprising us all, you've both done enough here. More than enough." For once, Amelia seemed cowed by her father's intensity, shrinking back slightly. Jessica, however, rallied in defiant anger. "You're making a big mistake, Adam, after everything I've done for you, letting you be part of Amelia's life." "Letting me?" Adam shook his head in disgust. "Using her as a pawn to try to fleece me over past mistakes? That's not any kind of favor. It's reprehensible, and it stops now." You can't do this," Jessica sputtered, panic creeping in as she realized her con was crumbling. "We're family." "No," Adam stated with chilling finality. "You're not my family anymore. Just another mistake to finally put in the past." Jessica opened her mouth to respond, but seemed to think better of it, shooting me a look of pure venom before storming out the door, Amelia slinking behind her. As the door slammed, I let out a long breath, adrenaline still coursing through me from the confrontation. Adam simply stood motionless, his expression unreadable. "Well, they're out of our lives for good now," I ventured carefully. "You did the right thing, Adam." He gave a slow nod, still seeming lost in thought. "Maybe. Maybe not. All I know is I can't let that toxicity continue poisoning everything I hold dear." I studied him for a long moment before speaking again. "For what it's worth, I'm proud of you for facing this head-on. Not many men would have had the strength." Adam's gaze finally met mine, stripped of the bravado and denial that had blinded him for so long. I only wish I had that strength sooner, before it all spiraled so far out of control. We stood in silence for a long stretch, the weight of the situation, of all the hurt and betrayal, hanging heavy between us. So much had been lost on the way to this point. Finally, Adam seemed to shake himself from his reverie. "Well, I suppose I should start putting my life back together. Try to salvage what I can." I gave him a sad smile. "For both our sakes, I hope you can." As I watched him turn and head upstairs, I felt an unexpected pang of melancholy. His entire world had been shattered upon the rocks of lies and deception. But in that wreckage, there was a chance to finally rebuild something stronger. Whether that new life would involve me, however, remained to be seen. For tonight, I simply felt a sense of relief that the worst was over. The con had failed, and sometimes just surviving is victory enough. In the aftermath of finally cutting Jessica and Amelia out of our lives for good, an uneasy truce settled over Adam and me. We were two wounded soldiers, battered from the same war, but still struggling to find common ground. He spent most of his days holed up in his home office, no doubt trying to salvage what was left of his career and finances after having to legally batten down the hatches. I could only imagine the professional embarrassment of having to admit he'd fallen victim to such an insidious family con. As for me, I drifted in the limbo of our guest room, unsure of what my next move should be. Part of me still loved Adam, still wanted to fight for the life we'd had before this nightmare descended, But could I ever truly trust him again after how thoroughly he had dismissed and turned on me? We rarely spoke beyond courteous nods in passing. The shadow of betrayal hung too heavy between us. Then one evening, a heated argument from Adam's office caught my ear. Voices raised in anger, his, but also an unmistakable snide female tone. I crept down the hallway toward the cracked door. "You think you've won?" It was Jessica, venom dripping from her words. "You arrogant son of a bitch, you haven't seen the last of this." "Get off my property before I call the police, you vindictive snake," Adam snarled. "You've already cost me everything." "Not everything, lover," she purred menacingly. "Not yet." There was a pause, then the unmistakable sound of a struggle. Objects clattering, Adam grunting in anger and exertion. I couldn't stop myself. I burst through the door to see them grappling, Jessica clutching a heavy paperweight as they tussled. "Adam!" I cried in horror, rushing forward to try and separate them. Suddenly, a searing pain lanced through my head as something struck me from behind. White lights exploded in my vision, and I crumpled dazedly to the floor, my world spinning. "Claire!" Adam's voice seemed to come from a vast distance. "Oh God, Claire!" Blearily, I could make out shapes moving, voices distorting in and out as unconsciousness threatened to claim me. A furious Adam snatching the paperweight from the floor, Jessica's mocking laughter as she backed away. "Who's the snake now, lover? Enjoy the sweet taste of my revenge." Then her voice faded, the only sound Adam's ragged breathing as he cradled me. I could feel warm stickiness spreading through my hair, each pulse of my heartbeat a spike of agony. "Stay with me, baby," Adam pleaded, voice thick. "Don't you dare leave me too." I wanted to respond, to reassure him, but the words stuck in my throat. Blackness crept in from the edges of my vision until everything faded to void. The next days, or was it weeks, passed in a drug-addled haze of pain and disjointed images. Hospital rooms, the acrid stench of antiseptic, murmurs of words like severe concussion and touch and go. When I finally reemerged into full consciousness, it was to find Adam slumped in a chair beside my bed, haggard and unshaven. He startled awake as I stirred, his eyes widening in relief. "Oh, thank God," he rasped, voice cracking with emotion as he grasped my hand. I thought I might lose you too." I struggled to blink the cobwebs from my mind, memories slowly coalescing. "Jessica," I murmured. "She was there?" Adam's jaw tightened with barely contained rage, her final parting shot before the authorities apprehended her. She and Amelia are both in custody now, facing a laundry list of charges. Despite my pounding head, I felt a sense of grim satisfaction. At long last, they would face real consequences for their depravity. "I'm so sorry, Claire," Adam went on hoarsely. "If I had just been upfront from the start about Amelia, about my past, none of this would have happened. You never would have gotten hurt because of my lies." I could only gaze at him for a long moment, taking in the broken man before me. Once so self-assured and confident, now brought low by the very secrets he thought could be buried. "You're right," I finally said, squeezing his hand. "This all could have been avoided if you'd just been honest with me." Tears welled in Adam's eyes as he held my stare. "I've lost everything that ever mattered because of my mistakes. My job, my reputation. I'll be lucky if I can rebuild anything from the ashes." Gently, I stroked the stubbled plane of his cheek. "Not everything," I murmured. "Not yet." Adam's eyes widened slightly, a glimmer of hope flickering to life in their depths. A fragile, tentative spark in the darkness, but a spark nonetheless. As I gazed at the man I'd once loved, I knew the road ahead would be long and arduous. Rebuilding trust, piecing together whatever could be salvaged from the wreckage of lies and deceit. But if that spark could catch, if we truly had the strength to overcome the betrayals, perhaps there was still a chance to rekindle what we had lost. The choice would be ours to make.
My name is Caroline. Most people just call me Liz or Lizzie. Some people even call me Betty, although I've never liked that name. My mother, father, and elder sister, Kate, made up what you would consider a typical family when I was growing up. Kate is 7 years my senior, and wow, that really made a difference. Our home has been a temple to Kate's existence since I can remember. Her first grin, her first steps, or her scrawl drawings that Mom and Dad cherished like Picasso's were all depicted on every wall. Me, I was only present. I adapted to it. You know, playing with Kate's old toys, wearing her hand-me-downs. I didn't know any better, but it wasn't terrific. I simply learned to be silent and not to raise a fuss. The pattern persisted over the years. I gave Kate her old clothing, and she got new ones. I received the things she had outgrown, and she got the newest. However, I never voiced any complaints. I simply was. High school came and went. By that time, Kate had already left home and was attending college on a scholarship. I had hoped that my parents would take more attention of me now, but they didn't. It was all about Kate's future, her new boyfriend, and her college experiences. The major announcement followed. One Sunday afternoon, Kate came bursting into the home, beaming and excited. She exclaimed, "Mom, Dad, I'm getting married." It would seem as though she had just declared that she had cured cancer or something. Dad began cheering and yelling, and Mom started crying. I pondered whether anyone had recalled my presence in the room while I sat there. Kate's eyes gleamed as she faced me. "Lizzie, you'll be my bridesmaid, right?" I forced a grin as I nodded. "Yes, Kate. Congratulations." I crept out of the room as they all hugged, sobbed, and laughed. Nobody took attention. They didn't. The magnitude of Kate's wedding exceeded everyone's expectations. I heard my parents conversing quietly in the kitchen one evening. Dad added, "We'll have to take out a loan," in a stressed tone. Mom let out a sigh. "I understand, but this is Kate's special day. We must not disappoint her." A knot started to grow in my gut. In order to pay for Kate's wedding, they were incurring debt. Though I knew better, I wanted to say something to emphasize how absurd this was. It didn't really matter what I thought in this house. The wedding was an extravagant event. Our parents smiled proudly at Kate's princess-like appearance. As usual, I felt invisible as I stood there in my bridesmaid dress. Following the honeymoon, Kate revealed yet another shocking revelation. She said, "I've decided to be a housewife at Sunday supper. Jack makes enough for both of us." Dad and Mom looked at each other. Despite their forced grins, I could see the fear in their eyes. The mother remarked, "That's wonderful, sweetheart, if that's what makes you happy." I felt like screaming. She wasn't even going to work now that they had taken out a debt for her wedding. However, I remained silent and pushed my food around my plate. Kate soon became pregnant, and she had twins, no less. Our folks went completely crazy. Twins. Dad shook his head in amazement as he continued. "Can you believe it?" I was able to believe it. I also couldn't believe what happened next. One evening, Mom said, "We ought to assist them in purchasing a home. They'll need the space with 2 babies on the way." Dad gave a nod. "We may contribute to a home down payment. That pleasant location is not far away." I was unable to remain silent any longer. "Are you serious?" I spoke without thinking. "You're already in debt from the wedding, and now you want to buy them a house." Both of them gave me a look as if they had forgotten I was there. Perhaps they had. "Caroline," Mom stated in a firm tone, "this is what family does. We support one another." A few months later, the twins, 2 adorable little boys, were born. Mom and Dad were ecstatic, swooning over the infants at Kate's new home whenever they had free time. I was attempting to determine my future course of action as I was completing high school. The obvious decision was to go to college, but how would I pay for it? I plucked up the nerve to inquire one evening. "Mom, Dad, I've been looking at colleges." Mom responded, "That's nice, dear," without raising her gaze from the twins' picture album she was organizing. I was wondering, could you help me with tuition? That glance that stated they'd rather be talking about anything else was shared between them once more. Well, sweetie, Dad said we'd love to help, but with the loan for Kate's wedding and helping with the house, we can cover half. Mom got right in, but you'll need to figure out the rest on your own. It seemed as though someone had hit me in the stomach. All they could accomplish was half, following everything that they had done for Kate. But I realized there was no use in disputing. Okay, I said, my voice small. Thanks. As I walked back to my room, I heard them resume their conversation about the twins' latest accomplishments. I closed my door, leaned against it, and for the first time in years, I let myself cry. I'd managed to get into the local community college, not my dream school, but the only one I could afford. With my parents' measly contribution, to make up the difference, I landed a part-time job at a nearby diner. Let me tell you, waiting tables while trying to keep up with college coursework is no picnic. I dragged myself home most nights, dead on my feet, dreaming of my bed. But even that small comfort was often yanked away from me. It started one Friday evening. I just finished a brutal shift and was looking forward to face-planting into my pillow when I walked in to find Kate in our living room, the twins crawling around her feet. "Oh, Lizzie," she exclaimed. "Thank God you're here. I'm at my wit's end with these two. Mind watching them for a bit? Jack and I haven't had a date night in ages." Before I could even open my mouth, she was out the door, leaving me with two screaming 3-year-olds. "What the hell?" I muttered, staring at my nephews. Don't get me wrong, I love the little terrors, but this wasn't what I signed up for. Mom wandered in from the kitchen. "Your sister is exhausted. This is what family does. Besides, it'll be good practice for when you have your own kids." I wanted to scream. Kids? I was barely keeping my head above water as it was. This became a regular occurrence. Every weekend without fail, Kate would show up, drop off the twins, and disappear. Sometimes she claimed she had errands. Other times she and Jack would go catch a movie or grab dinner, and every time I'd end up playing babysitter. One Saturday, after a particularly hellish week of exams, I'd had enough. Kate had just breezed out the door, leaving the twins mid-tantrum. "Mom, Dad," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "this isn't fair. I'm exhausted. I work, I study, and now I'm expected to give up my weekends too." Dad barely looked up from his newspaper. "Lizzie, your sister needs the help. You should be glad to do it." "But what about what I need?" I protested. "I'm running myself ragged here." Mom sighed. "Caroline, don't be selfish. Kate has 2 children to look after. You don't know how hard that is." I gave up. It was clear they weren't going to listen, so I resigned myself to my fate. Classes during the week, work in the evenings, and unpaid babysitting on the weekends. Personal life. That was a joke. The closest thing I had to a social life was making small talk with customers at the diner. Dates? Forget about it. Between work, study, and the twins, I barely had time to shower, let alone meet someone. I was at my breaking point. The constant juggle of work, school, and forced babysitting had left me drained, both physically and mentally. I needed a break. A real one, away from everything and everyone. So I made a decision. "Mom, Dad," I announced one evening, "I'm taking a few days off, going to the beach." Their reaction surprised me. For once, they actually seemed happy for me. "That's wonderful, Lizzie," Mom exclaimed. "Where are you going?" I told them about the cheap motel I'd found online, right by the ocean. Nothing fancy, but it was all I could afford. Dad nodded approvingly. "Good for you, kiddo. You deserve a break." I almost fell over from shock. Was this really happening? Were they actually acknowledging my needs for once? The day finally came. I packed my bag, hopped on a bus, and felt the weight lifting off my shoulders with every mile that passed. When I finally arrived at the coast, I couldn't believe my luck. The motel was small and a bit run down, but the ocean view was spectacular. I dropped my bag in the room and headed straight for the beach. The salty air filled my lungs, and for the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe. I treated myself to lunch at a cute little seaside cafe, savoring every bite. No screaming kids, no homework, no customers to please. Just me, my thoughts, and the sound of the waves. As the sun started to set, I headed back to the motel, already planning my evening of peaceful solitude. But as I approached my room, I heard familiar voices. Surprise, Lizzie. I froze. There, standing outside the room next to mine, were Mom and Kate, with the twins running circles around their legs. "What are you doing here?" I stammered, my heart sinking. "We couldn't let you be all alone on your vacation," Mom chirped. "So we decided to join you. We're right next door." I noticed their suitcases outside one of the nice rooms. Of course, they'd splurged on themselves while I was in the budget option. Before I could process what was happening, Kate was pushing the twins towards me. "The boys have been dying to see the ocean. You don't mind watching them for a bit, do you?" "I want to take a walk on the beach, and I need to run to the store," Mom added. "We'll be back soon." Just like that, they were gone, leaving me standing there with two overly excited 3-year-olds tugging at my hands. What followed was the worst vacation of my life. The twins were out of control, tearing around my small room like tornadoes. They ripped the curtains, broke glasses, and somehow managed to clog the toilet with apples. I had to shell out money I didn't have for repairs and to call a plumber. By the end of the weekend, I was more exhausted than I'd ever been. The final straw came when Kate had the audacity to complain about how tired she was from all the traveling. I lost it. The argument that followed was epic. I yelled, Mom cried, Kate sued, and the twins screamed through it all. I packed my bags that night and caught the first bus home in the morning. As I watched the coastline disappear behind me, I felt something shift inside. This couldn't go on. Something had to change. I dragged myself through the front door, exhaustion weighing heavily on my shoulders. Dad was in his usual spot, eyes glued to the TV. He barely grunted a hello as I passed. I crashed into bed that night, my mind a whirlwind of emotions and half-formed plans. When morning came, I knew what I had to do. I was halfway through packing my suitcase when I heard the front door slam. Mom's voice rang out, sharp and irritated. "Caroline, where are you?" She appeared in my doorway, face flushed with anger. "I can't believe you just left us there. Do you have any idea how difficult it was to manage the twins on our own?" I bit back a retort about how I managed the twins on my own all the time. Instead, I just kept packing. Mom's eyes narrowed as she took in the scene. "What are you doing?" "I'm leaving," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I'm moving out. I need my own life." Their reactions were immediate and predictable. "How can you be so selfish?" Mom cried. "After everything we've done for you?" Dad's face turned red. "You ungrateful girl. Have you thought about your sister? Who's going to help her with the twins?" I felt something snap inside me. My sister? What about me? When has anyone in this family ever thought about what I need? I pressed on. Kate has a husband. Let him help with the kids. I need to focus on my own life. "You listen here, young lady," Dad growled. "If you walk out that door, don't expect us to keep paying for your college. You'll be on your own." I looked at them both, these people who were supposed to love and support me unconditionally. In that moment, I realized they were strangers to me. "Fine," I said, zipping up my suitcase. "I'd rather be on my own than live like this. No personal life, no time for myself, just constant demands and screaming kids. I'm done." I pushed past them, dragging my suitcase down the stairs. They followed, still shouting, but I tuned them out. As I reached for the door handle, Mom made one last attempt. "If you leave now, don't bother coming back." I paused, my hand on the doorknob. Then, without looking back, I opened the door and stepped out into the unknown. The next few weeks were a blur. I crashed on a classmate's couch while scrambling to find a more permanent solution. Eventually, I connected with a girl from my study group who was also looking for a roommate. We found a tiny apartment that we could just barely afford between the two of us. With my parents cutting me off financially, I had to pick up more shifts at the diner. I was working almost full-time on top of my classes. There were nights I thought I wouldn't make it when the exhaustion was so deep I could barely think straight. But you know what? For the first time in my life, I felt free. No one was making demands on my time. No one was guilting me into babysitting or putting their needs before my own. The apartment was small, my bed was a mattress on the floor, but it was mine. I threw myself into my studies with a determination I didn't know I possessed. Every all-nighter, every missed social event, every extra shift, it was all working towards my goal, my future. Before I knew it, 2 years had passed. As I sat in the auditorium on graduation day, waiting for my name to be called, I scanned the crowd. A small part of me hoped to see a familiar face, Mom, Dad, even Kate, but the seats I'd reserved remained empty. Life after college was like stepping into a whole new world. I landed a job at a marketing firm, and suddenly I had a steady income that wasn't just scraping by. For the first time in years, I could breathe easy. I rented my own apartment, nothing fancy, but it was all mine, no roommates, no family drama, just peace and quiet. And let me tell you, it was glorious. I started doing all those normal things I'd missed out on before. I went on dates, made new friends, even had a couple of short relationships. Nothing serious, but it was fun to just be young and carefree for once. My parents, well, they were still in the picture, but barely. We talked maybe once a month, stilted conversations full of awkward silences and thinly veiled disapproval. They were still sore about me moving out, and I wasn't exactly rushing to mend fences. Then came my 25th birthday. I had plans with friends, nothing wild, just dinner and drinks. But a week before, I got a call from Mom. "Caroline," she said, her voice oddly cheerful, "we want you to come over for your birthday. The whole family will be there." Against my better judgment, I agreed. When I arrived at my parents' house, it was like stepping back in time. Kate and her husband were there, the twins now 7 years old, running around like little tornadoes. Various aunts, uncles, and cousins were all smiles and hugs. "Happy birthday, Lizzie." They chorused as I walked in. I plastered on a smile, accepting hugs and well wishes. Then came the gifts. Most were typical: clothes, books, gift cards. But then Mom handed me an envelope with a flourish. "This is from all of us," she said, beaming. I opened it, my stomach sinking as I saw what was inside: a ticket to a beach resort. "We're all going," Dad announced proudly. "A big family vacation. We've paid for everything." I froze. A family vacation with the twins. It was my ruined beach trip all over again. I opened my mouth to refuse, but Mom squeezed my arm, whispering harshly, "Don't you dare make a scene, not in front of everyone." So I smiled and thanked them, all the while screaming internally. The party wound down. Relatives trickled out, and finally it was just us. Me, Mom, Dad, Kate, and her family. That's when I let loose. "I'm not going," I said flatly. "What?" Kate gasped. "But it's a family trip." "Exactly," I replied. "And I'm not interested in spending my vacation babysitting your kids again." Kate burst into tears. "You don't love us at all, do you? You don't care about your nephews." "I care about them just fine," I snapped. "But if I wanted kids, I'd have my own." The argument went round and round. Mom called me ungrateful. Dad looked disappointed. Kate kept crying. They all tried to guilt me, to pressure me into giving in. "Fine," I said finally, my voice tired. "I'll go." They all looked relieved, like they'd won some great victory. But they had no idea what was coming. The day of departure arrived, and I found myself at the airport surrounded by my overly cheerful family. Kate and her husband were practically bouncing with excitement, already making plans for all the alone time they'd have while I watched the twins. "You'll have so much fun with Aunt Lizzie," Kate told the boys, winking at me. "She'll take you to the beach, build sandcastles, maybe even go snorkeling." Mom and Dad were beaming too, going on about how nice it would be for Kate to have a break. Not once did anyone ask what I wanted to do on this vacation. It was clear they all saw me as nothing more than a convenient babysitter. As we approached the check-in counter, I made my move. "Oh," I exclaimed, feigning discomfort. "I need to use the restroom. You guys go ahead and check in. I'll meet you at the gate." They nodded, distracted by wrangling luggage and excited children. I watched them join the queue, then turned and walked briskly in the opposite direction. My heart was pounding as I approached a different check-in counter. I handed over my passport and the ticket I'd bought weeks ago, a flight to a small, peaceful island resort. Once through security, I found a quiet corner and pulled out my phone. My hand shook slightly as I typed out a message to Mom. "I'm not coming with you. I'm going on my own vacation. Enjoy your trip." I hit send and immediately turned off my phone, not wanting to deal with the fallout just yet. I could almost hear the explosion of anger and disbelief that would be happening at the other check-in counter. As I settled into my seat on the plane, I turned my phone back on briefly. It immediately exploded with notifications, missed calls, voicemails, angry texts. I listened to one voicemail from Mom. Her voice was shrill and furious. "Caroline Morgan, how dare you abandon your family like this? You've ruined everything. Your sister is in tears. Her husband is furious. They were counting on you to watch the boys, and I had plans. You are the most selfish, ungrateful." As the plane took off, I sipped my champagne and gazed out the window. The guilt was still there, a small knot in my stomach. I knew I'd have to deal with the fallout eventually. There would be angry phone calls, tearful accusations, probably another round of being called selfish and ungrateful. But overwhelmingly, I felt free, light, like I could finally breathe for the first time in as long as I could remember. I was going on a trip that was just for me. No obligations, no babysitting, no family drama. Just me, the beach, and whatever I decided I wanted to do. As the plane touched down on the small tropical island, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. The warm breeze that greeted me as I stepped off the plane seemed to whisper, "Welcome to freedom." I checked into my resort, a modest but charming place right on the beach. As I unpacked, curiosity got the better of me, and I turned on my phone. Instantly, it exploded with notifications. Hundreds of text messages, missed calls, and voicemails flooded in. With a mix of amusement and trepidation, I scrolled through some of the messages. "How could you do this to us, Mom? You ruined everything." "Kate, you're so selfish. Caroline, Dad." I couldn't help but smile. For once, I had chosen myself over their demands. I turned the phone off again and tossed it into the hotel safe for the next week. I was unreachable. And what a week it was. I lounged on the beach, read books uninterrupted, went snorkeling, and even tried my hand at surfing. I chatted with other vacationers, went on a few casual dates, and stayed out as late as I wanted. No schedule, no responsibilities, no screaming kids. Just me and the rhythm of the waves. Too quickly, it was time to go home. I was more rested, tanned, and centered than I had been in years when I got back to my apartment. But my newfound tranquility was about to be disrupted by the outside world. My door was pounded on the very following day. When I opened it, I saw Mom and Kate, their faces flushed with rage. "How dare you?" Mom screamed and rushed in without warning. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" Kate followed closely following. "Our whole holiday was destroyed by you." It devastated the guys. Their voices overlapping as they flung insults and accusations, they went on a rant. I was a bad sister and daughter who was ungrateful and self-centered. I owed them for the ticket they had purchased for me, the vacation that had been destroyed, and the childcare that I had neglected to supply. For a few minutes, I let them to vent, and their comments passed over me without making any impression. Then I spoke, strongly yet quietly. "That's enough," I murmured, breaking through their cacophony. "I owe you nothing at all. Not my time, not money, not kid care. I get to make my own decisions now that I'm an adult." I held out a hand as Mom opened her lips to argue. "I won't be talking about this anymore. Leave now, please. We can chat when you're prepared to show me respect and have a civil discussion. I believe it would be better if we didn't talk till then." They were stunned into silence as they gazed at me. They then hurried out after using a few more foul remarks. I exhaled deeply when the door banged behind them. It seemed right, but it wasn't simple. I changed a lot during the following 2 weeks. I relocated without informing my family of my new address after finding a new apartment in a distant area of town. I immersed myself in my profession and took up other interests, such as yoga, painting, and even learning a new language. Not everything was simple. There were lapses in judgment and guilt. However, I knew I had made the correct decision each time I returned home to my quiet apartment, made plans without thinking about childcare responsibilities, or explored a new hobby purely out of want. I have no idea what the future will bring. Perhaps my family and I will manage to have a positive connection in the future. Perhaps not. However, I am aware that I will meet any challenge head-on and stand tall and unrepentant in the life I have chosen for myself. There have been many obstacles in life, as well as some little victories. The agony of losing my parents when I was young was intense and never really went away. However, I was fortunate to be taken in by the Parkers, an old couple who lived next door. They were the most generous individuals you will ever encounter. Instead of treating me as someone they were assisting, they treated me more like their granddaughter. The only thing that mattered was that we were rich in love, not a lot of money. The Parkers passed away in a vehicle accident right before my 19th birthday, when I was considering going to college. All of a sudden, I was alone once more. They left me a tiny sum of money for their suburban home and school. Although it was a warm, comfortable house with many memories, I didn't like how many reminders of the past there were. In order to purchase a tiny apartment in the city near the institution where I had enrolled to study financial management, I decided to sell it. Having a strategy and making progress felt nice. I put a lot of effort into learning as much as I could about markets and numbers in these challenging but fascinating lectures. I obtained a good job after graduation. I was working hard during the day and doing oak, but the evening seemed different. The city felt oddly lonely despite its bustling population. I met Peter at a friend's party at that time. He didn't care who saw him, he was loud, and he was entertaining. We clicked right away when he crashed into me and spilled my drink because of his infectious enthusiasm. Hey, watch it. I was more shocked than angry when I snapped. I'm sorry, let me compensate you. What did you drink? There was no trace of remorse in Peter's smile. Just beer, I answered, attempting to hide my smile. He yelled above the music, 2 beers coming right up, as he made his way to the temporary bar. That was Peter, plain and uncomplicated, without any drama. We spoke about everything and nothing all night long. We both detested sushi and enjoyed old movies. It was simple to talk to him, and I didn't want to say goodbye when the celebration was over. He proposed 2 years later. He took a ring out of his pocket, but there were no big gestures, just the 2 of us watching TV. He murmured, "Marry me," while clinging to the ring. I was afraid he would break it. Not because it was hilarious, but because the quiet moments, with their exquisite imperfections, were so us. I laughed. "Yes, of course, you big goof," I said. At first, marriage didn't make much of a difference. It felt natural that we were now formally bound together, but otherwise we were still the same people. We made our home in my tiny flat in the city, still near the busy streets, but with a companion to enjoy the quiet times with. For the first time in a long time, the nights didn't feel so lonely, and life felt more complete. Although marriage provided a sense of security, life has a way of keeping you alert. Mr. and Mrs. Scott, Jack's parents, were amazing individuals. They embraced me as a member of their family right away and lived in a comfortable suburban house. I could understand Jack's laid-back disposition. My heart, which was still hurting from losing my own family, was soothed by their warmth. Mrs. Scott would frequently squeeze my hand with such tenderness that it was both reassuring and a bit overpowering. "We're so happy you're part of our family now," she would remark. I would respond, "Thank you, I really appreciate how welcoming you've been," with sincere gratitude. We started going there every weekend. Backyard barbecues and lengthy coffee conversations were commonplace during those times. Simple and honest, life was lovely. Then, however, everything was different. Jack had to go a lengthy business trip. A full year would pass while he was away. The timing couldn't have been worse, yet it was an amazing chance for his career. Mr. Scott's and Mrs. Scott's health quickly deteriorated after Jack departed. Mrs. Scott contacted me one day, her voice worried. "I hate to ask, Laura, but I'm in serious need of your assistance." Her voice was full with sorrow as she said, "Mr. Scott is not doing well." I packed my stuff and went to the suburbs without hesitation. It disturbed me to see Mr. and Mrs. Scott so weak. Once powerful and stable, Mr. Scott now appeared so little, attached to tubes and machinery. I rapidly became accustomed to helping out around the house, cooking, cleaning, and performing other tasks, while Mrs. Scott concentrated on taking care of her husband. I used to sit with them in the evenings and read aloud from Mr. Scott's favorite novels. Before I finished a chapter, he would frequently close his eyes, whispering, "Thank you, Laura." His voice was only a shell of its former glory on the good days. I would gently squeeze his hand and say, "It's my pleasure," really attempting to console him in any small way I could. One quiet afternoon, while I was chopping vegetables for dinner, Mrs. Scott sat down at the kitchen table. She looked older than usual, the weight of everything clearly wearing on her. "Laura, I don't know how to say this, but we're in a bit of a tough spot," she started, nervously wringing her hands. Mr. Scott had always been the one providing for their household, and with him in such poor health, Mrs. Scott was clearly stressed. I put down the knife, giving her my full attention. "We're struggling, honey. I hate to even ask, but would you consider renting out your apartment? It might help us get through this rough patch," she said, looking down, clearly embarrassed. I didn't hesitate for a second. "Of course, Mrs. Scott. I'll take care of it right away," I replied firmly, wanting to ease her burden as much as I could. The apartment rented out quickly, and every month I made sure to send the rental money to Mrs. Scott, along with enough to cover groceries and bills. It wasn't easy. The commute to my job in the city was a nightmare, but I kept telling myself that family sticks together no matter what. "You're a godsend, Laura," Mrs. Scott would say, her voice obvious every time I handed her the money. "It's what family does," I'd respond, though there were nights when I lay in the guest room, listening to the distant sounds of the city, feeling like the weight of the world was on my shoulders. Jack's phone calls were my lifeline. Even though the connection was often bad, hearing his voice kept me going. "How's it going, Joyce? Are you holding up okay?" His concern was always clear, even through the static of a long-distance call. "We're managing. Don't worry about us," I'd say, trying to sound cheerful, not wanting to add to his worries. Life at the Scott's house changed drastically when Lauren, Mrs. Scott's daughter from her first marriage, showed up out of the blue. The whole atmosphere shifted the moment she arrived. She had a presence that felt like a cold wind sneaking in under the door. I didn't know Lauren very well, but Jack had mentioned her a few times, and I had seen enough during her brief, tense visit to know that her relationship with Mr. and Mrs. Scott was strained. My days were already long, juggling work and caring for Mr. and Mrs. Scott. Mr. Scott was getting better, then getting worse again, and Lauren's arrival only added more stress. She moved in like she owned the place, making herself at home without a second thought. One evening, after an especially hard day, Mr. Scott motioned for me to come closer. His voice was weak, a strained whisper. "Laura, you need to watch out for Lauren. She's not a good person," he said, his words making my stomach knot with worry. "I understand, Mr. Scott." "I'll be careful," I promised, though I wasn't exactly sure what I was supposed to be careful about. Mr. Scott's warning didn't take long to make sense. Lauren quickly made her intentions clear. One morning, I found her in the kitchen, her presence dark and cold, like a storm cloud. "Just so we're clear," she said, her tone sharp, "I'm not here to play maid or cook for anyone." She sipped her coffee, eyeing me like I was in her way. I felt like an outsider in her mother's kitchen. Lauren's presence made it clear that I was not welcome, but I tried to stay calm. "Okay, Lauren. I've been taking care of things so far, and I can keep doing it," I said, hoping to keep the peace. "Good, because I don't plan on lifting a finger." "This is Mom's house, after all," she snapped back, her eyes daring me to do otherwise. From that day on, Lauren made sure everyone felt her presence, and not in a good way. She would order takeout just for herself and her mom, leaving the empty containers on the table for me to clean up. Her attitude wasn't subtle, and it hurt. But I kept quiet because Mr. and Mrs. Scott needed peace. One evening, Mrs. Scott spoke up. "Laura, why don't you sit and eat with us tonight?" There was a rare warmth in her voice, and for a moment, I felt like the old days were back. Before I could answer, Lauren quickly cut in. "Mom, Laura has been busy all day. She probably prefers to eat later." Her words sounded concerned, but the message was clear. I wasn't welcome at the table. The days felt heavier as my chores doubled. Lauren's entitlement filled the house, and she often whispered to her mother at night, likely turning her against me. Mrs. Scott, once kind and understanding, began to change. Her smiles became fewer, her words colder. A couple of weeks later, Mr. Scott passed away. The funeral was a somber event, with Jack flying in just in time to say goodbye. It was the first. I noticed a shift. Time we had been together in months, and having him by my side brought a sense of relief. But even amidst the mourning, I noticed a shift in the air at the Scott home. Lauren was on her best behavior, acting polite to everyone with a forced smile. "How's everything been while I've been gone?" she asked me quietly when we had a moment alone after the service. "Fine, everything's been fine," I lied, forcing a smile. I didn't want to add to his grief by telling him about the tension in the house. "Are you sure? You look a bit worn out," he said, his brow furrowed with concern. "It's just been busy, you know, helping out here." I reassured him, avoiding his eyes. This wasn't the time to unload everything that had been happening. As soon as Jack left, Lauren dropped the act. The mask of the caring sister was gone, replaced by her usual sneering attitude. The dynamic in the house changed completely. Mrs. Scott, perhaps consumed by her own grief, grew distant and cold toward me. She stopped having conversations with me, only giving commands, and I felt more like a stranger than a part of the family. Lauren took over the house as if she owned it, acting like the lady of the manor. Her reign was marked by complete disregard for anyone's feelings but her own. She started barging into my room without knocking, rummaging through my belongings like she was searching for something valuable. One afternoon, I found her in my room again, and I knew things were only going to get worse. I was out in the garden trying to find some peace when I noticed a box lying among the shrubs. Curious, I opened it and felt my heart sink. Inside were my watches, jewelry, and even some of my underwear. Nearby, several of my dresses were carelessly thrown over a bush. Fury rose inside me as I grabbed my belongings, clutching the box tightly. I stormed inside and found Lauren lounging in the living room, acting like she owned the place. "What the hell, Lauren?" I demanded, my voice shaking with anger. "You can't just throw my stuff out." Lauren laughed, a cold, harsh sound that echoed through the room. "Live here, please. You're just a guest and not a welcome one. You should be out in the garden, or better yet, on the street. You're nothing but a useless beggar anyway," she sneered. Her words stung deeply, like pouring salt on a wound. Trembling, I turned to Mrs. Scott, who had just walked into the room. "Mrs. Scott, please tell her she can't treat me like this." "This is supposed to be my home too," I pleaded, my voice breaking. But Mrs. Scott, once so kind and gentle, looked right through me as if I didn't exist. "This is Lauren's house now," she said coldly. "She's right. Laura, maybe it's time you found somewhere else to live." Her words hit me like a punch in the gut. I stood there, clutching the box, my heart breaking. The home I had come to know, the family I thought I had, was falling apart in front of me. Despite everything, I stayed because of a promise I had made to Mr. Scott on his deathbed to look after his wife and not let Lauren take control. But day by day, Mrs. Scott started to become more like Lauren. Her once gentle words turned sharp, and her eyes grew colder. One evening, as I cleaned up after dinner, she snapped at me. "You're just sitting around doing nothing, aren't you?" "I'm doing my best to keep things running smoothly," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady despite how much her words hurt. "Your best?" she scoffed. "Could have fooled me. Looks like you're just freeloading." She turned her back on me and walked away, leaving me standing there feeling crushed. I was far from a freeloader. I had rented out my apartment and sent nearly all of the income to Mrs. Scott. I was handling most of the housework while Lauren did nothing but criticize. Lauren, living off her mother's pension, was relentless. "What is my brother even seeing in you?" She would taunt me at night, her voice loud enough to echo through the thin walls. I would bite my tongue, swallow my anger and frustration, and remind myself of the promise I had made to Mr. Scott. The atmosphere in the house had become unbearable, filled with tension and hostility. One evening, I came home early from work and overheard a conversation that turned my world upside down. I walked in quietly, unnoticed by Lauren and Mrs. Scott, who were in the middle of a heated discussion in the living room. "We need to get her to sell that apartment of hers. You know how much we could use that money," Lauren said, her voice greedy and calculating. "Yes, but how do we convince her? Laura isn't stupid. She won't just hand it over," Mrs. Scott replied, sounding both frustrated and greedy. "Leave it to me, Mom. I'll sweet-talk her into it. Once she signs it over, we can finally live the way we deserve." Lauren's words slithered through the air like a snake. Hearing them plot to take away my only financial security hit me like a punch to the gut. Fear gripped me. I knew in that moment I couldn't stay any longer. My heart racing, I slipped away to my room unnoticed. They were planning to rob me of everything, and I had to leave before they could succeed. I made up my mind right then and there. Every second in that house now felt like a countdown to disaster. With shaking hands, I quickly packed my essentials. I didn't bother with goodbyes. They didn't deserve them. Slipping out the back door, I ordered a taxi to take me to the train station. As I sat on the train, doubts swirled in my mind. Would Jack understand? Would he take their side? The uncertainty was crushing, but the fear of what might happen if I stayed was worse. I stared out the window, watching the landscape blur by, a mix of fear and determination settling in my chest. When I arrived at Jack's place, his reaction was a mix of shock, relief, and concern. His eyes widened as he opened the door, seeing me standing there with a bag in hand, probably looking as frazzled as I felt. "Laura, what are you doing here? Is everything okay?" he asked, stepping aside to let me in. I hesitated for a moment, taking in the familiar and comforting sight of his temporary home. "No, Jack, everything's not okay." "Not at all," I replied, my voice trembling. He led me to the couch, his face now full of worry. "Talk to me, babe. What happened?" he urged gently. I told him everything. I explained how things had gotten worse since Lauren came back, how the situation at home had become unbearable, and how they were plotting to manipulate me into selling my apartment. I hadn't wanted to worry him while he was away working, but now there was no hiding it. As I spoke, Jack's face grew darker with every word I said. When I finished, Jack's fists were clenched, and his jaw was tight with anger. "Why didn't you tell me any of this before?" he asked, his voice full of both concern and frustration. I didn't want to cause more trouble. I thought I could handle it, I admitted, feeling foolish now. "Laura, damn it. You shouldn't have to handle something like that on your own." He burst out, standing up and pacing the room. "I can't believe my mom and Lauren would treat you this way." He stopped and looked at me, his eyes intense. "I'm not letting anyone treat my wife like that. No way." Without hesitation, he grabbed his phone. My heart raced as I watched him dial his mother. The phone barely rang twice before she answered. I couldn't hear her side of the conversation, but the way Jack's shoulders tensed told me enough. "Mom, this has to stop. I know everything, and I won't tolerate it. If Lauren doesn't leave, and if you don't start treating Laura with respect, we're done. No more help, no more money, nothing." Jack's voice was firm, leaving no room for debate. There was a fiery exchange, and then silence. Jack gripped the phone tightly before speaking again. "Fine, if that's your choice, then you've made mine." He hung up and turned to me, his expression softening. "Looks like it's just us now, babe, but that's all we need," he said, pulling me into his arms. I leaned into him, feeling safe and supported. "Just us," I murmured, feeling the truth in his words. We were on our own now, but somehow that felt okay. Jack and I remained up late discussing everything, including how we would survive without helping his mom and Lauren, how I might set up remote work, and what our future plans would include. With only the two of us, it seemed like we were creating a new existence. We're all in this together, no matter what. It's you and me against the world. Jack grinned resolutely. Right, I said with a smile of my own, feeling more certain having him at my side. The days that followed were hectic. Fortunately, my employer accepted my request to work remotely. We established a little home office in the corner of Jack's living room after he assisted me in moving my belongings out of storage. Although it wasn't flawless, it was ours and tranquil. I felt like a ghost from the past when I got a call about a week into our new routine. Mrs. Scott was the one. Once so pleasant to me, her voice now sounded harsh, desperate, and entitled. Why haven't I gotten the money for this month, Laura? She immediately made a strong accusatory demand. You know we depend on it. Her nerve left me speechless for a time. It was unthinkable. I'm sorry, but after everything, you still expect me to support you. With a tone more shocked than furious, I asked. I could hear Lauren's abrasive, irate voice in the background. She simply lacks gratitude. Make her send the funds. I inhaled deeply to quell the rage that was building within of me. I kept thinking about the hurtful things they had said. Lauren referred to me as a merciless beggar, Mrs. Scott. Recall that I will not send money to anyone who behave in such a manner toward me. I finished. On the other end, there was stillness. This is the story of how I came to realize that family isn't necessarily blood, and that sometimes the people who ought to love you the most are the ones who hurt you the most. My name is Daisy. As a recent college graduate with stars in their eyes and professions on their minds, I arrived in the world as an unwanted surprise to my parents. My mother sought an abortion when she learned she was expecting. They weren't prepared, it wasn't the proper moment, etc. My grandparents, however, had different plans. You see, they were Ed, and they had been providing financial support for my parents. Upon learning of the pregnancy, they established a rule. Either have the kid or bid the gravy train farewell. I was an afterthought from the start. My mom was eager to return to work, so I had to rely on my grandma and a succession of nannies. Although I appreciate the attention they provided, it wasn't the same as having biological parents. My grandparents began to distance themselves from me as I got older. They had fulfilled their responsibility, keeping me alive in everything, and were now traveling to far-flung places to enjoy their golden years. I suppose I can't blame them, but it made me feel even more alone. I was basically rearing myself by the time I was 7 years old. I was able to prepare simple meals, wash my own clothes, and get ready for school. It was my usual, but it wasn't ideal. Then everything was different. My mother became pregnant once again. It was different this time. My parents were eager and prepared. They believed that after making a reputation for themselves and moving up the business ladder, they could now afford to have children. It felt like the sun had finally risen in our home when my sister was born. Cooing and fawning over her as if she were made of gold, my folks were ecstatic. I was forced into the darkness even more. The disparity in our treatment became increasingly apparent over the years. Toys, clothes, and attention were all given to my sister. She obtained what she desired. If she did something wrong, it was dismissed with a kids will be kids attitude and a giggle. Me, I discovered how to avoid making requests. I used what I had and wore hand-me-downs. If I made a mistake, I would be disappointed and given responsibility lectures. Please understand that we were by no means impoverished. Both of my parents were doing quite well. However, they saw me as already mature and self-sufficient. My sister needed the money more than I did, so why spend it on me? I gave my studies my all attention. I would have their respect if I couldn't have their affection. I joined every group I could, maintained my good grades, and avoided problems, yet it was never enough. When I gave them my report card, they would nod absently before returning their attention to my sister's finger-painting masterpiece. When high school finally arrived, I was eagerly awaiting my departure. I applied to universities covertly, keeping my parents in the dark until I was admitted. After being accepted into one of the top universities, I quietly packed my stuff and departed. They didn't realize I was gone for 3 entire days. Even so, it was only because my mother insisted on having some yogurt. Her voice seemed informal when she phoned, as if she were inquiring about the weather. "Daisy, could you pick up some low-calorie yogurt from the health food store on your way home?" It nearly made me chuckle. She was just interested in yogurt, and here I was, beginning a new chapter in my life. I tried to speak steadily as I said, "Mom, I'm not at home. I spent the last 3 days in college. I reside in the residence halls." The other end was silent for a minute. As she tried to digest this knowledge, I could practically hear the gears spinning in her mind. Then, with no trace of regret or worry, she added, "Oh, well, you'll have to stay in a hotel if you return. Your sister now has your room." Although college life was exciting, finances were tight. My grandparents, bless them, provided me with financial assistance, even if my parents did not. Regularly, they sent me tiny amounts, enough to keep me afloat. Even though it wasn't much, the idea that someone in my family genuinely cared meant more to me than the money. During our few phone conversations, my grandma would remark, "Daisy, dear, we're so proud of you. You concentrate on your schoolwork, okay. Put all other worries aside." To my soul, those words were like a balm. Determined not to disappoint them, I pushed myself back into my studies with newfound zest. I was adamant about doing well in my classes. Therefore, I was unable to work part-time like many of my peers. I thus made every cent matter, lived mostly on ramen, and squeezed pennies. Life back home went on without me in the meanwhile. The golden kid, my sister, was having academic difficulties. My folks didn't really care. They made allowances for all of her mistakes, hired the greatest instructors money could buy, and lavished her with praise for even the smallest progress. Companies were already lined up to hire me by my senior year. My instructors praised me. I received several job offers because my resume was flawless. However, none of them felt really correct. I desired more. I wanted to demonstrate to myself that I could succeed on my own terms, and perhaps even to my family. I thus took a risk. I submitted an application to a prominent European multinational corporation. Though it seemed unlikely, I reasoned, I had nothing to lose. I almost passed out when I received the email of admission. This was my pass to a new life and a new beginning. In the crowd, my grandparents were smiling with pride as I graduated with honors. My folks, a generic card of congratulations was delivered. That wasn't even anything my sister bothered about. I didn't care, though. I had outlived my need for their acceptance. I considered contacting my parents to bid them farewell as I prepared to go for Europe. Ultimately, I chose not to. What might be said? They had made it apparent how important I was to them. Rather, I gave my grandparents a firm embrace and made a commitment to write and contact frequently. Everything I had dreamed for and more was life in Europe. I would occasionally phone my parents. I suppose old habits die hard. However, every discussion was like pulling teeth. Always too busy or preoccupied to engage in meaningful conversation, they would respond in monosyllabic terms. and they didn't call me at all. Then I got to know Marco. He worked in marketing and had a smile that could light up a room. He was charming and witty. We were co-workers at first, then friends, and before I knew it, we were in love. I didn't think twice when Marco proposed to me on a Patano beach in the moonlight. We made the decision to get married in Italy. One evening, while we were going over wedding arrangements, Marco suggested we should go tell your parents in person and appropriately invite them. It's the proper course of action. Thus, equipped with wedding invites and optimism, foolish hope, as it turned out, we took a plane back to the United States. It was obvious we weren't welcome as soon as we entered the house where I grew up. My parents were aloof and preoccupied. They hardly recognized our news and hardly gave Marco a glance. My mother looked at her phone and remarked, "Oh, that's nice." However, we're quite busy. We are managing the renovations at your sister's new flat, which requires some work. It was a long, unpleasant week that we spent there. My sister's new house was where my parents were most of the time. However, my sister, she was there, constantly observing, always present. I saw the flutter of her eyelashes and the sly smirk as she gazed at Marco. My stomach turned over. One evening, she stated, "Marco, I would really like your opinion on the color scheme for my bedroom. Would you mind coming up and having a look?" I could see Marco's uneasiness. I interrupted him, but I don't believe he began. "Enough of that," I said at my sister. "Get out of his way. He's my fiancé." She pressed her features into a pout. She complained I was just being friendly. "Daisy, you're so self-centered. Everything is something you always want for yourself." She probably rushed off to scream in front of our parents. And sure enough, my mother appeared with a thunder-like expression about 5 minutes later. She screamed, "How dare you talk to your sister like that? After everything we have done for you." I let out a rough, sour laugh. "What have you done for me? Isn't that a joke? All you've done in your life is neglect me." However, it was pointless. I would always be the bad guy, the undesired kid who dared to have more in their eyes. I made a choice that night while Marco and I laid in bed at a neighboring hotel, because, of course, my sister now uses my former room as a home gym. "Let's head home," I said. "Go back to Italy." I no longer call this place my home. It's been a while since then. Marco drew me in, his warmth providing solace in the harsh truth of my family's lack of interest. "All right," he stated plainly. "Let's head home." As we boarded the plane the next day, I felt a mixture of relief and sadness. Relief to be leaving the toxicity behind, sadness for the family I never really had. Back in Italy, life slowly returned to normal. Marco and I threw ourselves into wedding planning, determined to create the perfect day. But the visit home had left a bitter taste in my mouth, a reminder of all I'd left behind. "Are you sure about this?" Marco asked one evening as we sat on our balcony, the sun setting over the Tuscan hills. "Not inviting your sister, I mean." I took a sip of wine, letting the rich flavor roll over my tongue before answering. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life," I said finally. "After what happened, I can't have her there, Marco. I won't." He nodded, understanding in his eyes. What I didn't tell him was about the messages, the explicit, inappropriate messages my sister had been sending him on social media since we'd left. I'd seen them by accident one day when using his phone. He'd been too embarrassed, too kind, to tell me, but I knew. And it was the final straw. 6 months flew by in a whirlwind of cake tastings, venue visits, and dress fittings. Before I knew it, we were just weeks away from the big day. There was just one last thing to do. With a deep breath, I picked up the phone and dialed a number I still knew by heart, even after all these years. Oh, Daisy, what is it? We're rather busy at the moment. My mother's voice distracted as always. I swallowed hard, pushing down the hurt. I'm calling about the wedding. I booked your flights and hotel. Everything's paid for. We'd love for you and Dad to come. There was a pause. That's nice, dear. But what about your sister? We haven't received an invitation for her. I closed my eyes, steadying myself. She's not invited, Mom. After what happened during our visit and the messages she's been sending Marco, I don't want her there. Messages? What messages? My mother's voice had an edge to it now. The explicit ones, Mom. The ones she's been sending my fiancé. It's inappropriate and disrespectful. I won't have that drama at my wedding. The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. I could almost hear the gears turning in my mother's head, trying to find a way to excuse my sister's behavior, to make me the bad guy once again. I don't know what you're talking about. Your sister would never do such a thing. Daisy, be reasonable. I am being reasonable. For once in my life, I'm putting myself first. You and Dad are welcome to come. The flight details will be emailed to you. I hope you'll be there. She didn't say anything and just hung up. The morning of my wedding day dawned bright and beautiful. Everything was perfect. The flowers, the music, the food. Everything except for the 2 empty seats in the front row. As the hours ticked by, guests began to arrive, and a knot formed in my stomach. Where were they? Surely they couldn't do that to me. Marco, I said, my voice trembling slightly, can we delay the ceremony a bit? I need to make a call. His eyes filled with understanding and sympathy. Of course, amor. Take all the time you need. With shaking hands, I dialed my mother's number. It rang, and just as I was about to give up, there was a click. Hello, my mother's voice was groggy and irritated. Mom, where are you? The wedding's about to start. There was a pause. Daisy, do you have any idea what time it is here? We were sleeping. It's the middle of the night. It seemed as if someone had hit me. Are you sleeping? However, you were expected to attend the wedding. I emailed you the hotel details, the ticket, and everything else. Oh, that. Her tone became icy. Well, we made the decision not to go. Today is your sister's housewarming celebration. We couldn't overlook that. What I was hearing was unbelievable. She's warming up the house. However, she has been aware of my wedding date for months. She scheduled it for today, but why? Daisy, don't be self-centered. You are not the center of the planet. In addition, Toifu had invited your sister, as you ought to have. How could you expect us to attend one daughter's celebration, but not the other, Mom? With a harsh voice, I interrupted her. After what she did, you know why I didn't invite her. Daisy, that's all in your brain. Such an action would never be taken by your sister. You've always tried to make her appear terrible because you're envious of her. I let out a sour laugh. Are you jealous? Do you believe this is about that? God, Mom, do you even hear yourself? Young woman, don't take things personally. You are to blame for this. I have no interest in your sister's party. For her, I completed. My wedding is obviously none of yours too. Mom, goodbye. Have fun at the celebration. Before she could reply, I hung up, my hands trembling, but my will unwavering. I took a big breath, looked in the mirror, and decided what to do. I thus went down the aisle by myself, without a mother to weep or a father to give me away. But I knew I didn't need them when I saw Marco standing there, his eyes full of love. Everything I required was in this place. Wounds tend to heal, or at least become numb, over time. Together, Marco and I created a successful, loving, and humorous existence. With promotions and recognition for our efforts, We had both ascended the corporate ladder. We built a home, traveled, and made friends. My parents didn't get in touch. No Christmas pleasantries, no wedding congrats, nothing. I eventually stopped anticipating that they would. On my birthday, I stopped looking at my phone and stopped expecting a Christmas card. That was simpler. Then my phone rang on an arbitrary Tuesday in April. My hometown is an unknown number with a very recognizable area code. "Hello." With my heart racing, I replied. "Daisy, is that you?" Compared to my memory, my mother's voice seemed older and more worn out. "Daisy, we need your help." The tale was thereafter released. My parents' employer, for which they had given up everything, including their connection with me, had filed for bankruptcy. They had no funds to fall back on and were unemployed. As my mother added, "We've always lived well. You know that." There was a hint of desperation in there. "We need assistance, even though we acknowledge that we haven't been good parents to you. Please." I closed my eyes, feeling a mixture of contradictory emotions. Sadness for their predicament, anger at how they had been treated in the past, satisfaction at their retribution, and a little treacherous glimmer of hope. This could have been it. Perhaps this was the first time they would notice and appreciate me. "Okay," I eventually said. "I'll assist. How much do you require?" I winced at the sum she stated, but I could pay it. After all, Marco and I had done well for ourselves. With a range of emotions churning in my chest, I made the transfer right away. I informed her, "It's done. The money should be in your account soon." The pattern persisted throughout the ensuing months. There will be constant requests for money in the text messages. The demands were regular, but the emails had shrunk. And I foolishly sent the money each time. Marco discovered me looking at my phone with a regretful smile on my face following one of these transactions. Gently he inquired, "They asked for money again?" I gave a nod, and I mailed it again. God, when did I become such a sucker? Marco put his arm over my shoulders as he sat next to me. "Amor, you're not a sucker. You're nice. It's not your fault that they are unable to recognize their wonderful daughter." On a quiet Sunday afternoon, my world began to tilt once more. I had a cup of coffee and was aimlessly browsing Facebook when I was struck by a picture. My parents were relaxing by a pool at what was obviously a very nice resort, looking comfortable and tanned, sipping drinks. As I clicked through additional pictures, my fingers trembled. They appeared to be enjoying their best lives, dining at a restaurant with a Michelin star, and standing in front of an opulent spa, as if they had stopped pleading with me for money months ago. I browsed to my sister's page with increasing dread. What I witnessed there chilled my blood. She is shown in several pictures in upscale bars with fancy shopping bags stacked around her and a brand new sports vehicle. Additionally, the subtitles read, "The world's greatest parents have given me yet another incredible gift. I am fortunate to be the only child. I'm really fortunate to have parents that will stop at nothing to help me. Proud yet spoiled. Nothing but the best for our little princess, and you deserve it all. Sweetheart," were among the comments left by my parents, who liked every post. I was ill. The phone fell to the ground with a clatter as it slid from my shaking fingers. How were they able to? Dare they? Just like clockwork, my phone began to ring. They were the ones. I took a long breath before responding. "Daisy, dear," my mother said in a falsely lovely voice. "We wanted to know when the next transfer might be sent. You know, life has been really difficult. We are considering remodeling the house. It has become so dismal and aged. Something inside of me jerked. How could you? I seen the pictures, Mom, the resort, the dining options, and the presents for my sister. After a break, my mother's voice became icy. "Listen to me now. You were given life by us. You know, we decided to have you instead of my getting an abortion. We are owed everything by you. Let's talk about that money now." I stopped her in her tracks. My entire body trembled with anger and pain as I hung up. Immediately, the phone began to ring repeatedly. The inundation of texts alternated between demands and guilt trips. I switched off the phone. My parents kept calling and messaging throughout the course of the following few weeks, first requesting money, then begging, and then threatening. I chose to disregard it all. I disconnected all of their communication channels, disabled their phone numbers, and unfriended them on social media. It wasn't simple. There were times when I felt guilty or doubtful, but whenever I faltered, I thought back to those pictures, those remarks, and the hurtful things my mother had said to me. As the years went by, life kept changing. In Europe, Marco and I had established a prosperous life. However, we felt compelled to return to the United States. Perhaps it was nostalgia, or perhaps it was the need to have our own family in a place we knew well. We decided to go back to my hometown for any reason. We immediately adapted to our new life, which included a charming home in a peaceful area, exciting and challenging prestigious employment, and plans for the family we planned to have soon. Everything seemed to be coming together at last. I found out about the significant change in my estranged family's life one day while enjoying coffee with an old school acquaintance. With gossip-filled eyes, my acquaintance remarked, "Did you hear about your sister's party?" I shook my head, preparing for the next move. "And it was wild," she added. She smoked in bed and fell asleep after everyone had left. The entire home caught fire. Daisy totally demolished the home, but your sister managed to escape. I sat in disbelief. Due to my sister's negligence, the home where I grew up, the site of countless contradictory memories, was turned to ashes. My pal went on to say, "That's not even the worst part. It appears that your parents let the insurance to expire. They'd lost everything." I experienced a brief moment of satisfaction, which was soon followed by shame for having such feelings. Mostly, though, I felt nothing. I had made my decision, and they had made theirs. Life continued. Marco and I concentrated on our future, our homes, and our jobs. Then all changed on a bright Saturday morning when there was a knock on the door. My parents were right there when I opened it. They appeared aged and worn out. The expensive clothing and immaculately styled hair had vanished, to be replaced with antiquated, scruffy attire and disheveled, graying hair. My mother murmured, "Daisy," in a shaky voice, "We need your help." I stood still as they told me their story of misery. Living in a small rental flat, having no funds, having no parental assistance, and being unable to obtain employment at their age. "And your sister," my father continued in a resentful tone. "We requested to remain in the apartment we purchased for her. She told us she didn't have space for elderly folks and threw us out. The absurdity of the golden child betraying them, just as they had betrayed me, made me want to laugh. But as I saw their frantic expressions, the laugh left my throat. "Please, Daisy," said my mother. "There is nowhere else for us to go. Our only hope is you." I was tempted for a second. The part of me that had always yearned for their affection and acceptance wanted to open the door and let them in. Then my mother continued, "You owe us this," in a tone that changed from begging to demanding. "I could have aborted you after all. Your life is owed to us." The magic was broken in an instant. A sense of peace descended upon me, a conviction I had never experienced before. "No," I answered in a calm, firm voice. "I owe you nothing at all. Not for having me, not for neglecting me for years, nor for repeatedly picking my sister above me. Your decisions were your own. You must now coexist with them. I'm asking you to go now. I'll contact the cops if you don't." I resisted my father's attempt to go forward. "I mean it," I acknowledged. "Leave now and don't come back." Threats and obscenities were hurled as they departed. When the tears eventually came, they were tears of relief and closure rather than regret or grief, so I leaned against the door and closed it. I gave my grandparents a call that evening. Even though they were far away, they had always supported me. As I told them the entire tale, they listened and offered consolation and encouragement. The words "you did the right thing, Daisy" were spoken by my grandma. You can't set yourself on fire to keep others warm, especially those who wouldn't even notice if you burned. I had a wave of calm as I hung up the phone. I had cut the remaining connections to my poisonous past. Before me, the future loomed bright and full of opportunities. I'm Kate, and I was raised in a modest home that was always filled with the aroma of freshly baked bread. After school, I enjoyed helping Dad knead bread at the family bakery that he inherited from his parents. Mom was different. She made more money than Dad ever did as a realtor, always wearing dapper suits and high heels. "Kate, come set the table," Mom shouted one night when I was 12 years old. I was gangly and ungainly, and my main interest was reading. "Coming." As I spread out the dishes, I dog-eared my page and screamed back. Another calm month until I heard them start up again. Mom said in a contemptuous tone, "John, when are you going to get your act together?" Dad's response was kind. "Sarah, please, not in front of Kate." "Oh, who cares?" Mom lost her temper. She should know what a loser her father is. I held onto the table's edge and forced myself to hold back my tears. In our home, this was a typical scene. Dad attempting to maintain order while Mom made fun of him. I was aware that Mom felt stuck in a life she never desired and was upset about more than simply money. "Kate," Mom gave a bark. "Where's my wine?" With trembling hands, I quickly poured her a drink and put it down. The tablecloth was splattered with some. Mom's eyes blinked. "You worthless girl. Is there nothing you can do correctly?" Dad stepped in. "Sarah, it's only a little wine." Nothing was harmed. Mom gave him a fierce look. "You treat her too leniently. It's no surprise that she's becoming as pitiful as you." I buried my face in my pillow and ran to my bed. I had a deep affection for Dad, but I didn't understand why he tolerated Mom's behavior. For my part, I had mastered the art of being as discreet and silent as possible. When I woke up the following morning, there was an uncanny silence in the house. No click of Mom's heels, no fragrance of bread baking. Dad was seated at the kitchen table, his face pale as I slipped downstairs. "Where's Mom?" I inquired, even though I had a strong feeling that I already knew the answer. Dad handed me a note in Mom's beautiful handwriting without saying a word. "John, I can't do this anymore," it said. "I'm taking Richard with me. Instead of this all-town bullshit, he can offer me the life I deserve. Don't bother looking for me, Kate. You are only useless. You are not necessary to me. You're a loser, John, and you've made our daughter into one as well. Good riddance and goodbye." I felt as though I had been hit in the gut as I gazed at the page. Mom had left. In her final shot, she called me worthless and Dad a loser, abandoning us. The ensuing months were a haze of court cases and psychological distress. Dad petitioned to have Mom's parental rights revoked and filed for divorce. As we waited for Mom to arrive, I recall sitting in the chilly courthouse with my sweating hand gripping Dad's. She didn't. As the grown-up spoke, I lost myself in my thoughts, only to pick up on phrases like abandonment and unfit parent. Dad squeezed my hand when it was done. Softly, "It's done, Katie," he murmured. "Your mother's parental rights have been terminated, and the divorce is official. Now it's just you and me." With a mixture of relief and regret, I nodded. After that, life became more difficult. Dad put in a lot of effort and worked long hours in the bakery. I did the most of the chores even though I was only 12. After doing my homework when I got home from school, I would begin making supper and doing the wash. This pattern lasted for 3 years. Then things changed once again shortly after my 15th birthday. One day, Dad arrived home with a look of astonishment and sadness on his face. Saying Uncle Pete died, he fell onto a kitchen chair. Saying, "Oh, Dad, I'm so sorry," I gave him a strong embrace. He gave me a hug in return. Then with wide eyes he withdrew. "You won't believe this, Katie. He bequeathed me over $300,000. His sole surviving relative is me. I'm not sure how to handle it all." However, Dad immediately figured it out. He used some of the funds to extend the menu and upgrade the bakery's equipment. Our small bakery became the buzz of the town in a matter of months. Before we realized it, Dad was establishing a second site across town, hiring additional employees and extending the hours. Dad had 3 successful bakeries by the time I was 16. Our concerns about money were vanished. I gave up my after-school employment to concentrate on my education. We even traveled to Europe for 2 weeks, which was our first actual vacation. Over the years, Mom faded into the background. Although Dad dated from time to time, he never showed any desire in getting married again. We were content just the way we were, so I didn't push it. High school graduation passed quickly, filled with tears and cap tossing. I had put in a lot of effort, and it had paid off. I was on my way to study finance at State University. Dad gave me a little package the morning I was scheduled to go. "What's this?" I opened it to discover a key and asked. Dad smiled. "Your present for graduating. It's an apartment close to the university. Rent and dorm life are no longer concerns." I was dumbfounded when I looked at him. "I can't, Dad. This is excessive." I protested, but he waved me away. "Katie, you deserve it. Go now and make me proud." College went by quickly. Determining to take use of the chance Dad had given me, I poured myself into my studies. I was working as an intern at nearby financial businesses while I wasn't in class or studying. I had a junior financial analyst position lined up by the time I graduated. I was standing in front of my apartment mirror, smoothing my blazer on my first day of work. "You've got this, Kate," I expressed to my mirror image. "Make Dad proud." Although the work was difficult, I enjoyed it. Instead of spending every bonus or increase I received, I invested it. I kept hearing Dad say, "Katie, money makes money. Use it wisely." Years went by. Those wise investments paid off by the time I turned 32. In addition to the flat where I resided, I also owned 2 other apartments that generated consistent rental revenue. It was a nice life. Then came the call that made all the difference. "Katie," Dad said in a strained tone, "will you please come over? I need to discuss things with you." He appeared older than I had ever seen him when I saw him seated at his kitchen table. "What is it, Dad?" With a knot in my gut from terror, I inquired. He inhaled deeply. "Honey, it's cancer. Phase 4. Pancreatic." Everything shook on its axis. "No," I muttered. There must be some mistake. However, there wasn't. A terrible roller coaster of therapies, remissions and relapses characterized the following year. Even when he was too sick to consume it, I made his favorite cheese soup whenever I had free time in the hospital or at Dad's place. When I got to Dad's house one cool fall day, he was sitting in his favorite recliner with a serious expression on his face. "We need to talk, Katie," he murmured, supporting the seat next to him with a touch. "The doctors gave me 6 months tops." "No," I remarked, angrily shaking my head. "They're mistaken. We'll seek another viewpoint." He softly interjected, "We, Katie? It's all right. I have come to terms with it. The bakeries are for sale. You're going to get everything. You will be prepared for life." I drew back and wiped my eyes. "Dad, I don't want your cash. I desire you." He gave a sorrowful grin. "I understand, my love. However, this is how I can look after you, even if I'm not around." The following 7 months were both difficult and valuable. We spoke about everything and nothing more than we ever had before. I committed his facial expression, every chuckle, and the scent of flour and sugar that clung to him to memory. Then he vanished one peaceful Wednesday morning. The funeral went by quickly. Then I sat with Dad's favorite apron in his empty house. The documentation had already been completed by the lawyer. Dad had left me everything as promised. I purchased 2 additional apartments with the money I made from the bakeries. Somehow, it felt natural to create something enduring, just like Dad had done. I was only beginning to get my footing a year after Dad's death. Taking care of my rental homes provided me a feeling of purpose, and work kept me occupied. I believed that I had found a new normal. Then the call arrived, which completely upended everything. "It's your mom," Kate said. "I've returned to the city. If you don't mind, I'd want to see you." My thoughts were racing. There was a part of me that wanted to hang up to protect myself from the lady who had left me, but there was also a part of me that was inquisitive and yet clung to the young girl I used to be. "Okay," I said to myself. "Let's meet at Rosie's Cafe tomorrow at noon." My stomach was in knots when I got to the cafe early the next day. I watched her enter as the clock struck 12. Despite her advanced age, she maintained her elegance. She wasn't alone, though. She was followed by a young female, about 17. Mom ran over as soon as she saw me. "Kate, you look amazing, my love. And here is your sister, Lily." It seemed as if someone had hit me, my sister. We took a seat, and Mom began to tell us about her lover, Richard, who had abandoned her soon after Lily was born, their financial difficulties, and her decision to return to her hometown in order to start again. She said, "I heard you have a rental property," in an upbeat tone. I was wondering if maybe. She faded off, but it was obvious what she meant. I glanced at Lily, who was obviously uncomfortable as she stared at her hands. I reflected about my father and how he had always instilled in me the value of kindness, especially in the face of difficulty. I remembered the frightened young child I was, hoping her mother would return. "Okay," I heard myself say. "I have a unit that's just become available. You can stay there." Mom's face lit up. "Okay, thank you. We'll pay rent, of course." I held up a hand. "No rent, just utilities for now." As we hammered out the details, I watched Lily. She looked so young, so out of place. I remembered being her age, feeling lost and alone after Mom left. "So Lily," I said, trying to sound friendly, "you're what, a junior in high school?" She nodded, meeting my eyes for the first time. "Yeah, it's weird starting at a new school for senior year." A twinge of pity ran through me. "I wager. Listen, I'm there if you need assistance with anything, including schoolwork or simply someone to chat to." "Okay," Lily smiled slightly at me. "Thank you. That's really significant." Mom gave me another embrace as we walked out of the diner. "Kate, you are an angel." I hope we can start over, even though I know I have a lot to make up for. Unconfident in my ability to talk, I nodded. As I fell asleep that night, I couldn't get rid of the thought that my life was going to become much more difficult. However, I had a sister and my mother was back in my life, for better or worse. What it would entail for all of us would only become clear with time. After Mom and Lily returned, the months that followed were peculiar. Mom returned to her previous life as if she had never gone, finding employment as a realtor quite fast. For her final year, Lily enrolled at the nearby high school. Unsure of how to handle this new family dynamic, I stayed away. Mom would sometimes call or visit. She would exclaim, "Kate, darling, thank you again for the apartment," with a broad, apparently genuine smile. "You've been such a blessing." Uncomfortable with her eloquent appreciation, I would nod. "Don't worry, Mom, I'm happy I could assist." I became cautiously friends with Lily. I would listen to her college aspirations or assist her with her math assignments. In a way, having a sister was pleasant, but the burden of the years we'd lost was always a barrier. Lily's graduation followed. I went to the event and saw her collect her diploma from the rear. Mom smiled proudly, and I let myself think for a second about what could have happened if she had stayed. Mom unexpectedly knocked on my door the very following day. Her eyes were burning, her cheeks heated. She abruptly said, "We need to talk," and pushed past me into the living room. Confused, I followed. "What's going on?" She spun around me. "Don't act foolish. Kate, I am aware of the flats. The 4 of them." I felt sick to my stomach. How did she know? "What about them?" Keeping my voice low, I asked. Screaming, "You've been holding out on us," she said. Living the high life while Lily and I scraped by. I became irritated. "Pardon me. One of those flats is yours without any rent. Is that insufficient?" "I should own half of those properties," she spat. "I'm your mom." I was unable to resist. I chuckled. It was completely ridiculous. "You're not serious. When you left us, you forfeited all claim to my belongings. Do you recall? No child support, no parental rights." Her tone abruptly altered to one of desperation. "Remember Lily, Kate, my love. For college, she needs money. If you were to sell only one flat—" "Absolutely not," she interrupted. "Lily's education is not my responsibility." "How can you be so selfish?" Mom cried. "After everything I've done for you?" The final straw was that. "Everything you've done for me," I said, astonished. "You mean to leave me?" "In your farewell message, you called me useless." Or, hold on, are you referring to months of rent-free living in my apartment? Mom flinched as though I had smacked her. She just gazed at me for a time, opening and shutting her lips like a fish out of water. She turned and hurried out, slamming the door behind her without saying another word. I was trembling with hurt and rage as I stood there. How could she attempt to guilt me in this way after everything? I put my head in my hands and sunk into the couch. Although I knew in my heart that allowing Mom to return to my life was risky, I had hoped. Well, I wasn't sure what I had hoped for. I had a sharp, throbbing grief as the excitement subsided. This lady was just a stranger who wanted to take advantage of me, even though she was supposed to be my support system and defender. What about Lily? How was I supposed to handle Lily? I was getting coffee at my normal place 2 weeks after Mom's outburst when I saw the barista staring at me strangely. I noticed a little chatter from a next table while I waited for my order. Isn't it unbelievable? Renting all those apartments while charging her own mother. I went cold. They couldn't possibly be referring to me, yet they were. I heard more murmurs and more sidelong stares throughout the course of the following several days. Mom had apparently been busy telling everyone who would listen her distorted version of events. The Facebook post followed. I almost choked on my sandwich when I saw it during my lunch break. My daughter Kate makes a fortune by renting out her 4 flats, but she won't contribute to her sister's college expenses. I'm barely making ends meet, and she's making me pay outrageous rent. That my own child could be so avaricious and self-centered breaks my heart. Every comment that came in was a stab to my heart. How could she harm her own mother in that way? What a terrible individual. I've always sensed that something was wrong with her. On the bandwagon, friends, family, and even former classmates I hadn't spoken to in years shamed me for my alleged avarice. They all didn't seem to care or remember that this woman had left me when I was a kid. My employer summoned me into his office just when I thought things couldn't get much worse. "Kate," he replied, his expression solemn. "Your mother and I need to discuss this matter. The reputation of the business is beginning to suffer." The blood in my face started to run out. "Sir, I can explain." He extended a hand. "I don't need specifics, but I need this resolved fast and quietly. This type of drama cannot be connected to our company. Recognize." Untrusting myself to speak, I nodded numbly. When I returned to my work, I saw an email alert regarding Mom's apartment's unpaid utilities. Fantastic, simply fantastic. I shook my hands and punched in Mom's number. As a welcome, she snarled, "What do you want?" I inhaled deeply while attempting to maintain a steady voice. "Your apartment's utility bills are past due, Mom. Remember how we said you would take care of those?" She laughed. "Oh, please. With all those flats, you're making a ton of money. You have enough money to cover a few expenses." I murmured, "That's not the point, as my tolerance wore thin. We had an agreement." She interjected, asking, "An agreement? Like the promise that you would support your family?" That did us a great deal of good. I felt as like everything was falling apart as I sat there with my phone in hand. How could I have allowed this to happen? This was how I got compensated for trying to be good, giving, and kind. I arranged to see a lawyer with a sad heart. "Miss Stevens," the attorney stated as he looked over my case, "evicting your mother is perfectly within your rights. You've given her plenty of notice, and she doesn't have a lease or pay rent. Take note of the utility bills." With a mixture of relief and fear, I nodded. "What do I need to do?" I inquired. He gave me a piece of paper. "This is a formal notice of eviction. We can take legal action if she refuses to cooperate after we serve it to her." With the document in hand, I took a car to Mom's apartment, which was actually my apartment. When I knocked on the door, my hands were shaking. Mom said, her face contorted in annoyance at my presence. "Oh, it's you. Have you finally changed your mind about selling Lily's college apartment? Lily has chosen her school. Next month is when tuition is due." My surprise gave way to rage. "Are you for real now? You're still making demands after all that you've done." Mom sneered, "Don't be so dramatic. It's the least you can do for family." That was it, the final straw. I shoved the notice of eviction at her. "This is it. You have 30 days to leave the property." Mom's face turned pale as she gazed at the page. Then she blew up without warning. She yelled, "You ungrateful little brute," as her voice reverberated throughout the room. "After everything I've done for you." I refused to back down. "What have you done? You mean to leave me? Spreading false information about me?" She lifted a hand and surged forward. I winced, but the blow did not land. Rather, she spewed abuses in my face while grabbing the front of my shirt. "You hear me? You're nothing. Nothing but a callous, self-centered. I struggled to release myself and grabbed my phone. That's all. I'm going to call the cops. Mom didn't back down even though her eyes widened. She went on with her fury, her remarks growing more savage by the moment. I was crying uncontrollably and trembling when the cops came. I politely explained the problem and showed them the eviction notice. One officer said, "Ma'am, I think you should calm down and have a polite conversation with your daughter about this." Mom scoffed, "Sybil. Alongside her, she's attempting to abandon us to the streets." The other cop looked at me. "Legally speaking, Miss Stevens, this is a civil case. Without a court warrant, we cannot take her away by force. I would advise attempting to resolve this amicably between you two, or, if need, going to court." I gave a dejected nod. I was infuriated by Mom's victorious grin as the police departed. "You won't do it," she teasingly said. "You don't have the guts to take your own mother to court." She had given birth to me, but she had never been a real mother, and I just gazed at her. Something hardened within of me at that same instant. I said, "Watch me," in a steady, quiet voice. I turned and left before she could reply. I heard the apartment door slam behind me as I arrived at my car. I considered what was ahead as I drove home. More drama, more suffering, a legal battle. But perhaps it was also an opportunity to finally escape the poisonous grip my mother held on me. I thought I would throw up on the day of the court hearing. Mom and Lily were seated on the other side of the courtroom when I entered. Lily appeared to want to vanish, and Mom's eyes were swollen and red. Mom put on quite a show as the events got underway. As she spoke to the judge, her voice broke, and she sobbed uncontrollably. She cried, "Your Honor, my daughter has been so heartless. After everything I've done for her, she's attempting to abandon her own mother and sister." I tightened my hands and forced myself to remain composed. Then I felt a sense of relief when my lawyer got to his feet. He said, "Your Honor," in a steady, assured voice, "I'd like to present some evidence that paints a very different picture of the situation." He continued by outlining the facts, including Mom's refusal to pay child support, the termination of her parental rights, and her desertion when I was 12. He presented the judge with the unpaid utility bills and the rent-free agreement. He wasn't finished, though. "Furthermore, Your Honor, we have evidence that Mrs. Stevens is not, in fact, in the dire financial straits she claims." Mom's eyes widened and her head jerked up. My attorney went on. "Mrs. Stevens' ex-partner left her an apartment in a different city. She presently earns a sizable monthly income from renting out this house." There was silence in the courtroom. With a severe frown, the judge turned to face Mom. "Is this true, Mrs. Stevens?" Mom was looking pale. Her mouth moved back and forth many times before she said, "Yes, Your Honor." When the judge handed down his decision, his voice was icy. "The eviction is granted by this court. In addition, Mrs. Stevens shall reimburse the rent for the month she lived in the flat without paying rent. Your behavior, Mrs. Stevens, is absolutely unacceptable. This case is over." With a resounding sound that seemed to reverberate throughout my body, the gavel fell. It was done. We had prevailed. I saw Lily as we were leaving the courthouse. My heart hurt for her because she appeared lost and perplexed. She was not at blame for this. Ignoring Mom's scowl, I approached her. "Lily," I murmured quietly, "I'm sorry it arrived at this point. You may still contact me if you need assistance, genuine assistance, okay." With tears in her eyes, she nodded. "I apologize, Kate. I was unaware." I smiled sadly at her and turned to go, feeling as though a burden had been removed. Over the next few weeks, Mom and Lily left my flat. Through rumors, I learned that they had moved into Mom's other home. They didn't get in touch with me, and I didn't try to get in touch with them. Recollections of the previous several months raced through my head as I stood in the now empty flat. The stress of the court fight, the hurt of Mom's betrayal, and the joy I'd had when she returned. But I felt liberated beneath it all.